So this beautiful pile of cast iron and steel here is a big block Chevy, but not just any big block Chevy. This is a 427 cubic inch tall deck commercial block. And you can tell because this water pump bolt, there's about ½ inch between that bolt and the deck surface. The deck surface is about 0.4 roughly inches higher on each side, and it's still 427 displacement, but since it's a commercial engine, these are your pistons, and if you look close you can see there's an extra compression ring. Here's your standard rings and everything, and your oil rings, and then your two regular compression rings, but then there's a third compression ring up here which is a little bit thicker, and then you have some extra piston height on top of that. So they make up for it by adding 0.4 inches to the top of the piston. These are fully forged rods, fully forged crankshaft. The rotating assembly is fully forged. These are standard big block castings, but all of the commercial engines were oval port. As you can see, no peanut ports here. Those were only the 454. And these valves are sodium filled for extra cooling. Basically, they're hollowed out and they're cast full of sodium, and as the valve heats up, it helps to wick that heat away rather than just raw steel that's sodium in there. Anyway, they're very, very expensive valves if you can find them, but the rest of the heads are pretty well stock that you'll find on a regular older big block. You can also tell it's a 427 because it's got the 7.0 cast into it. It'll say truck on it. Almost all the industrial commercial tall deck engines will have truck cast into it, but a lot of the regular big blocks will have truck cast into it too. That really doesn't mean anything. I will find the casting number on the back later and look up roughly what year it is, but I have had this thing sitting around for years and I haven't got around to building it. The deck needs hot tanked, probably cleaned up. These are matched caps and they are stamped, so they're in the right position. The rotating assemblies are balanced from the factory, and by that, as parts came off the assembly line, they would weigh them and put them in opposing cylinders according to the correct weights. And of course the rotating assembly is balanced. I'm not sure why this still has the factory paint marks on it. I don't know much about the history of this engine other than I got it and it was in pieces, and from what I can tell it's pretty good and very rebuildable. You can also tell these heads came off of a commercial engine because this is the commercial clutch pivot and it bolts to the head in this case for the, I believe, the larger transmissions. But just the sign that it came off of a manual transmission truck means that these aren't like out of a 454 out of an RV or something, and obviously they don't have the peanut port heads, but you can't really identify the sodium filled valves very easy without looking at part numbers, and so just looking at them I can pretty much tell that these heads probably match this engine, so they should have all the correct valve configurations and everything. You can look at the casting numbers, but they won't tell you much because the castings are still the same between the regular big block. This is 343772. Same over here. Same castings. And you probably, if I looked them up, I would probably find that those castings are used on all number of big blocks. So obviously this needs checked, cleaned, and needs some work done before it's ready to go. The fact that it's painted orange like this And I don't know, it looks like somebody painted it after the fact, so this probably isn't an older engine. I'll have to look up the casting numbers, but it looks like somebody sprayed it after the fact, so that is probably almost certainly not a factory paint. I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing exactly. These are tremendous engines. All the tall deck engines have a different intake manifold because obviously the deck heights are higher, so that spreads the intake further apart. So they all have a specialized intake, and they all have dual thermostats on them, not only for redundancy, but also it has a lot of increased cooling in these engines. These are made to run in like Kodiak and Top Kick trucks. Like, they're made to run all day at like 4,000 RPM. Not much above that, but most of them came with a governed Holley carburetor, and except for the later ones that had EFI. But you can see they come with the size of a standard big block. I mean, the size of these journals are just absolutely immense. They use a standard cam from a standard big block. They have special water pumps. There's two different types of water pumps, but they're both very, very high volume. Larger pipes, larger hoses, larger volume all around. These are really, really good engines. A lot of racers will take these blocks and they'll use that extra height to get extra cubic inches out of it, rather than use these extra tall piston slugs in there that are, you know, like basically diesel pistons. They will use just a standard 427 piston, and they'll get longer rods, and then they'll get a little bit more cubic inches out of the block. Anyway, I don't know what I'm going to use this for, and I don't know if I'm ready to build it yet, because I don't really have the facilities for engine building in my shop, as you can see at the moment, because my shop is a little, well, it's out in the weather, so I'm not sure what my solution for this is going to be, but I would really like to build this engine and put it in something, but I'm not sure what form that's going to take yet. I wanted to note, for those maybe not in the know, I mean, not everybody knows, but you can tell this is a forged crankshaft by the lines here. They're not like thin casting lines. You can tell that it's been hammered on. Just a quick way to tell. So this is 3856 with a 223 under it. Casting number looks like. I don't know if that's the number. I'm reading these off for research later. That says something something GM. That's just a standard number. You can also tell that this is internally balanced because it's been drilled. The counterweights have been drilled, and you know, it's been factory balanced. These pistons, if we looked real close and when we clean them up, there's stampings on these as well, but you can see each one from the factory is stamped and marked. And this is a factory thing. I've taken apart these commercial engines. Most, if not the majority, except for the later of these commercial engines, were made by hand. And so you'll see a lot of hand stampings, like this is piston number 3. And so I can easily put this back together in its factory weighted configuration just by all the stampings on there. I don't have to check the weights and the balances myself. There's a lot of details on this engine. There's a lot of stuff on my website. I have a huge page on these engines and all the little minutia and nitty-gritty details and things. But the tall deck, or a commercial engine made to kind of compete with like the International engines. International was putting gas engines in their tractors and pickups and everything, and it was like the same engine. And they had a really good commercial engine line, and not just International, but you know, Ford and you know, the big manufacturers, Chrysler. They had specific commercial engines that were for the most part made in low batch, but they're all made for not horsepower, but they're made for torque, and they're made for longevity, extra cooling and size and grunt. And you can see that just by looking at the size of those cylinder slugs there. I mean, they're absolutely immense. Kind of glad they left the rings and the bearings in there. You can kind of tell that the condition of everything was good when they took it apart. Like I said, this is going to have to be hot tanked and cleaned up, but That is fine. That is relatively cheap. I'll have to check, you know, bores and decks and everything. I just wanted to note also that everything from the factory on these, you'll see lots of hand stampings. And on here, you'll see the caps are stamped with numbers. This says 1 there. I don't know if you can see it. This says 2 there and 3 and so on. They're hand stamped from the factory, whereas a lot of the, you know, it's just a regular Chevy small block or a regular non-commercial Chevy big block. You won't see many, if any, hand stampings on them because they just went down an assembly line, and you didn't have necessarily people doing things by hand. A lot of them, you know, tooling and machines. But that is one thing I always liked about these engines, because a little bit more care from the factory went into these engines than just your regular big block or small block Chevy engine. You know, a lot of eyeballs went into these engines as they came down the line. Now the 427s are special, obviously, because they've got that humongous bore. They also made a 366 commercial engine. Some people will tell you they made a 454. They did not. They never made a 454 tall deck. The later 8.1 liter is a tall deck, but that's the only other quote-unquote tall deck that was really made. These, the 427 is special because it's the bigger one, and it's immense. And you can see the size of those cylinders. I mean, they're huge. You're talking like, you know, 4-inch pistons, and you have, they're not necessarily a high compression engine like diesel would be, but they have that extra ring for longevity. Well, it just makes them more durable. And that's the main thing. These engines will run at relatively, you know, high RPM, like 3,000-4,000 RPM, you know, day in and day out. And that's what they're made to do. They are made to take, you know, grunt force. There is surface rust on this block. Like I said, hot tanking is in order. I don't know if it will need bored, and I don't know if it has been bored. I don't think so, because those look like factory, obviously factory pistons, and it's hard to find overbore with the extra ring in them. When I build this, I will not be building it as a racing engine. It will be built in its standard factory commercial configuration with the 3rd compression ring, and, you know, the heads will stay the same, and I will try to find, they're harder to find these days, but I'll try to find the factory intake with the dual thermostat. And you can find 366 for parts, because a lot of them are the same except for the block and the pistons and that kind of thing. So, you know, the heads and everything, they're pretty well identical. So if you can find a 366, you can pirate it for parts. I also want to note, over the years, there has been much debate on distributors for these engines. And these engines use the same distributor as a standard Chevy small block or Chevy big block. Same length, same gears, same everything. They're not taller because it's a tall deck, because the intake is actually shorter to make up for that. And if you think about it, it wouldn't have made any sense for GM to use a bespoke distributor for a commercial engine when all they had to do was lower the intake height at that point where the distributor seats. The only exception to that, there's one exception, and that is some of the very early ones were not a chain drive cam. They were a gear drive cam. So you had one gear on the crank and one gear on the cam, so the cam spins backwards. There are very few of them out there, and the distributor gear is backwards because of that. But I have not seen one in eons, and very rare. You're going to go back to the 60s for that. So probably most of them have been converted or long gone or junked by now. And those are mostly 366s that were the reverse rotation. The 427s, many fewer 427s were made. But these are a very desirable engine block for racers especially. But yeah, because you can turn this into a 454 by lengthening the crankshaft throw. And then, of course, it's a tall deck, so it's already more than a 454 if you put in longer rods and the shorter pistons. So you can get a pretty large engine out of these things. They're still cast iron, but anyway, like I said, I won't be doing that. This will be built as a commercial engine and probably go into one of my trucks or vehicles. I don't know. I'll find something worthy of this. Maybe it'll go into the service rig. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? Would you guys like to see a 427 tall deck go into this service rig, backed by the old ancient SM465 that may or may not survive? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Anyway, like I said, there's a lot of this, on my website, which is in the description down below if you're interested in any of the GM commercial tall deck engines. And I just want to do a quick run through for anybody who's not familiar or has never heard of these. The tall deck engines they're still out there, and they were made up into the 90s and put in the Kodiaks and Top Kicks, mostly in 366 form, but you can still find some 427s. Also some marine engines. You can find some 427 marine engines out there from the 80s and 90s. So you never know what you're going to find. The main thing to look for is this extra deck height. Here you can see in the casting, it's thicker here. On a regular big block, this will be machined straight across there, and you won't see this wider casting section there that you see on both sides here. That's the main thing to look for, and you can tell that with the heads, and you can tell that with the engine fully built. And you can tell if it's a 427 or 366. The 427 will have the 7.0 stamped in it, and the 366 will have the 6.0 stamped in it. So that's how you tell real quick if you have a tall deck and if you have a 366 or a 427. Oh, by the way, I'm not downplaying the 366. I'm also a fan of the 366, even though it has much smaller pistons. The rest is the same. It's still a highly durable commercial engine. Everything is forged in the rotating assembly, and I have run them myself, and they're a very, very extremely durable gas engine. They do not get great gas mileage. None of these commercial engines do, but that's not the point of them. So yeah, just thought I'd throw that out there for anyone who's interested, or even anyone who isn't interested. If you made it this far in the video, we appreciate you watching. We appreciate all of your input, comments, questions. We really appreciate subscriptions. Helps the channel grow. Any likes, comments, questions you have, leave them down there below. And as always, thanks for watching.